Hi, everybody. So this lecture is going to be about models of correctional treatment. So the four main models or theories that we're going to discuss today are desistance theory, risk needs responsivity model, which we've already more or less gone over, the good lives model, and restorative justice model. So rehabilitation theory, in order for a theory to be considered part of rehabilitation, it has to have three linked components. The first are the principles, values, or general aims. So that's like if you think about your research methods, those are the problems or the general aims that the program wants to accomplish. The second part is a set of ideological assumptions. So ideology really means causal, just a big fancy word for that. And so we have to understand what causes offending behavior, and our theory of rehabilitation has to somehow address that. And then, so C really is the treatment, really is geared towards addressing the aim using our background information on the cause of the problem. So all those things have to be intertwined. So for those of you who have backgrounds in criminology, you've probably already learned a lot about desistance theory. So desistance theory is largely a criminological theory, and they argue that desistance is not an event. So it's not like somebody just stops committing crimes, but it's a process with lapses, relapses, and recoveries. And as a psychologist, I would agree with that. If you think about anything, it's not like we suddenly stop eating sweets for the rest of our lives, but we may work to have a more healthy lifestyle, and there are going to be a few cake binges and cookie lapses in there, but ultimately, over the years, we will work towards having a more healthy diet. The same thing goes with offending. There's not going to be necessarily this one kind of stop. It's going to be a process where they decrease their involvement in criminal activity, and if you look at people's arrest histories, that's generally how it goes. So desistance research really focuses on the processes that are associated with individuals turning away from a life of crime and becoming integrated within the community. So as we kind of talked about, it's a process. So these are the desistance researchers kind of have come up with different factors that are impacting desistance. And a lot of these are independent of therapeutic intervention. So we as psychologists, or if those of you who are thinking about being in mental health, look for different things that we can do to help people make the change. But there are things that are going on in their environments that are not necessarily related to themselves, but that help them with that process. So things like turning points. They're just things that happen in life that kind of make people see things like the birth of a child, or the breakup of a relationship, or losing a friend to death, for example. That could be a turning point, make you look at things differently. Aging. The data is very stark that offending behavior significantly decreases with age. I think people just get a little bit tired out of the lifestyle. We see that with mental illness symptoms as well. As people age, they tend to not have as severe, for bipolar mood swings or by borderline personality disorder, as many self-harm instances as they tend to age. Marriage can also be a turning point. People who go into the military can desist from offending. A cognitive transformation, so that's when you kind of see the light, something has happened and you now view things differently. The Pygmalion effect, that's based on My Fair Lady. The original play was called Pygmalion. So if somebody kind of believes in you and tries to transform you, then you believe in yourself. Knifing off is referencing kind of gang or antisocial peer involvement. So you cut yourself off from those antisocial peers. We do find that getting involved with spirituality, whatever that may be for the individual, such as religious service attendance or finding God or a higher power, can be very powerful. Education is extremely powerful in helping people to desist from offending. And then developing relationships and social networks. So none of those are therapeutic interventions per se, but these are kind of specific life events that result in people desisting from crime. But according to desistance theory, in addition to those events, some people need more professional intervention than others in order to stop from offending. And largely they postulate that this is due to environments, that these individuals just never learn the skills they need to kind of function adequately as adults in society. And so they don't have a lot of psychological resources on their own to cope and to problem solve and things like that. And that's where we as mental health professionals will come in. So The two main psychological rehabilitation models that are used in offender rehabilitation are the risk needs responsivity model and the good lives model. And you'll see sometimes these guys get pitted against one another, but ultimately my belief is that they're somewhat congruent and they work together quite nicely, that we need to address the things in the R&R model, but that the good lives model is really how we go about doing that. And we'll talk about those momentarily. So the R&R model, the general aims and principles, if you remember, are what we need to have a rehabilitative theory are that we want to, the primary aim is to reduce the amount of harm inflicted on the community by the offenders. So our goal is to reduce harm. And people are going to vary with their respect to their predisposition to commit crime. So some people are going to be at higher risk and some people are going to be at lower risk due to a variety of factors like, do they have brain damage? Do they have an extensive criminal history? Do they have deviant sexual arousal, for example? And the severity of the risk, so low, medium, or high, varies with the number and severity of their criminogenic needs. So, do they have a deficit in social skills? Do they have mental illness? Do they have antisocial orientation or antisocial peers? So the more of those things they have, the higher risk they're going to be for reoffending. And the most important treatment targets are those that research found to reduce recidivism rates. So there's a lot of meta-analyses, and Carl Hansen does a lot of these for sex offenders, where they look at all the studies and they combine them and they put them together. You're going to be hearing a lot about meta-analyses because these are really the best ways that we have to evaluate research. We take a whole bunch of little studies, combine them, and get a really huge sample size and look overall what the findings are, because some studies find positive things, some studies find negative things. But meta-analyses often wash out the idiosyncrasies of smaller sample sizes to have huge sample sizes. And so we can then determine what factors are causing people to reoffend at higher rates, and those are the ones that we want to target in our treatments. It's very important to treat individuals humanely and ethically, that everybody, whether incarcerated or not, are human beings, and we have to be ethical in the way that we treat them and approach them as human beings and not as some other, which I see a lot, unfortunately, in the criminal justice system. However, while we do treat them as individuals, their rights, unfortunately, are trumped by community needs. So when we do our treatment, we do have to think about the safety and protection of those around us. So if, for example, your client is a sex offender and he tells you, and you have a really strong relationship with him and he's been doing great, but now he tells you that he's having urges to offend against his neighbor, your duty is not to him. Your duty is to protect that child, and you have to report that. So meta-analyses, which I just described to you, kind of, as I said, look, they combine the different studies, have found support for R&R treatments to reduce recidivism among youth, so those under the age of 18, female offenders, sex offenders, and violent offenders. So there's a lot of support in the literature for treatment interventions that adhere to the R&R model, which we talked about in our last lecture. So some of the things that people were critiquing about the R&R method, and these are the people mostly who developed the Good Lives model, which is Tony Ward and his colleagues. They're based out of Australia and New Zealand. So a lot of the R&R model is based on risk being static, meaning unchangeable risk like people's age and things like that, versus things that are dynamic and can change. Not to say that the R&R model doesn't think that dynamic risks like the criminogenic needs are important, but a lot of it is based on this assessment of risk. And we also tie risk to subjective ideas of harms and benefits to individuals, although I think we can all agree that preventing people from getting hurt is relatively objective. And so, if somebody is at increased risk for doing that, they are at increased risk. In the R&R model, it underplays the contextual nature of human behavior, so it doesn't look at a lot of environmental factors. It also doesn't focus on motivation, which is a huge thing in psychology. We'll be talking about motivational interviewing when we talk about substance abuse treatment. And we don't really focus on personal goals. We kind of focus on, okay, this is the trait, these are the traits of the individual, but not what that individual wants or needs. So it's largely based on a radical behaviorist view of human nature according to the GLM people. What is true, though, is it focuses largely on avoidance goals, meaning don't do this, don't do that, like don't offend, don't go near people that might be higher risk for you, and rather focus on approach goals. So what is going to benefit the offender and society? And they also said that the R&R is a one-size-fits-all approach, which the people who developed the R&R would disagree with, but they feel like it's very standardized and doesn't really address the individual needs of each offender. So in response to what was felt as a deficit of the R&R model, the Good Lives model was developed. And this was largely developed based on the positive psychology movement. I don't know if you've heard about this, but Dr. Seligman out of the University of Pennsylvania kind of felt like in psychology, we often study about negative things like depression, suicide, all these anxiety, but we don't focus on people's resiliency. Like, so what makes people resilient and what makes people have positive outcomes. So rather than focus on all the negative things like, what makes people feel bad, why don't we focus on what makes people feel good? And that's how kind of the idea of the Good Lives model came to be. So I thought this was a really nice quote. Offenders want the possibility of better lives, not simply the promise of less harmful ones, which would make sense, right? Like you get out of prison, this is supposed to be an opportunity for you to better yourself. That's why you were put away. You're going to change. You're going to now be a constructive member of society, and you want to have a better life. And I think this quote is really important and kind of can help us understand a little bit better. As a kid, I had lots of examples of what I didn't want to be. I spent my life trying not to be those things. Then when an aide asked me about 5 years ago what I wanted to be, I really had no idea. So this is by a 40-year-old male in civil commitment, so that's a civilly committed sex offender. So, oftentimes people involved in the criminal justice system are living in environments where they don't have a lot of good role models. And so they don't want to, be like their abusive dad or their drug dealing uncle or et cetera, et cetera. But we don't give them a lot of things to look forward to, like a lot of goals and how to accomplish those goals if they don't have, good role models or good mentors in their lives. And I think that's where we as psychologists or mental health providers can really come in understanding what people want and desire so that they can live a more fruitful life. So the Good Lives model is a rehabilitative framework, and it's a strengths-based positive approach. So meaning that we're building on the strengths of the individual, and positive approach meaning we're building, instead of focusing on what they can't do, we're focusing on what they can do to make their life more full. It's more holistic, I guess, in a sense. It's collaborative, meaning that you work together with the therapist and the offender, and we use motivational approaches to kind of get them motivated to make change. So oftentimes offenders feel like they're coerced or they're forced to get into treatment, otherwise they're not going to get released. And this is really where motivating them by promising them the potential of a better life if they engage in certain things. So we want them to, the goals of Good Lives model are for the offender to achieve a fulfilling life and psychological well-being, which is what we all want as human beings, but at the same time managing their risk. So we recognize that those individuals have gotten here because of their criminogenic behavior. And so we want them to manage that, but at the same time we want them to be able to have a good life. And so the focus really is on treatment. In treatment is how the offender will benefit from treatment and what they're going to gain from it upon release. So we want really in the Good Lives model to understand what's important to the offender and help the offender obtain those goals. Is it important for them to be a family member, a member of their community, a member of their religious organization? Is it important for them to engage in sports, to have leisure activities? These things seem kind of counterintuitive to when we think of people who've committed crimes, but really, if you think about human behavior and what motivates us, that's what all of us want, and that's what offenders want too. They just don't know necessarily how to get those things. And we manage risk by finding what's important in an offender's life. So if you have things that are important to you in your life and your life becomes more full, you're A, not going to want to lose those things by engaging in criminal behavior, and B, you're just not going to have the time to be, doing criminal behavior because your life is going to be full. And so we do focus on managing risk by changing and monitoring known risk factors and by teaching self-regulation. So helping the individual monitor, when they are at risk in situations that put them at risk. So we talked a lot about last lecture, cognitive behavioral therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy really is the means through which we will achieve those goals. So the Good Life model is a theoretical framework, and the method through which we achieve, learning a lot of those skills is through CBT. So we really are seeing treatment and CBT goals as something to add to what the offender already has. We're going to teach them how to have leisure activities, how to find a job, how to get a social life. And so we're not going to take away their problems, but really we're not going to restrict them. We're not going to say, don't do this, don't do that. Rather, we're going to say, let's find out what you want to do and how we can do that, and how your offending behavior interferes with you achieving those goals. And so we use CBT skills to help the offender recognize what those goals are and how to achieve those. So the Good Lives model is broken up into primary and secondary goods. So there are 10 primary human goods that human beings across the board, whether they're involved in the criminal justice system or not, want to develop in order to have a full life. Like you've probably learned in your theories class about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all want to have a good quality of life. And so what we do in the Good Lives model is we make a good life plan. And so we figure out what of those 10 primary human goods are important to the person. So the Good Life Plan is really a roadmap to fulfill a fulfilling and well-balanced life that can lead the offender to be pro-social and offense-free. And then you can also relate those goods to their criminal behavior, in this case sexual offending, which was primarily developed for, but can be applied to any type of offending behavior. And so in treatment, and then once people are in supervision in the community, attaining their goods, or these primary goods, should assist in reducing or managing their risk to reoffend. So this is what a good life plan is encompassing. These are the 10 things. So life, healthy living and functioning, inner peace, freedom from emotional turmoil and stress. So that's working to kind of manage your anxiety, excellence in play, having hobbies and interests, spirituality, whatever that may mean for the individual, finding a greater meaning in life, pleasure, feeling good in the here and now. So we might use different techniques like mindfulness or cognitive restructuring. Knowledge, going to school, continued education, learning, creativity. So learning to express yourself through different mediums, community, connecting to wider social groups, in excellence in agency. So autonomy, power, and self-directedness, so that, they've been controlled by the criminal justice system. So now they have to assume control of their own behavior. Excellence in work. So whatever work they choose, whether that be, around the house or out, for money, they're achieving excellence in that area. And relatedness, having intimate, romantic, and familial relationships. So how do they achieve those? Those are through secondary goods. Secondary goods are the ways that people go about securing those primary goods. And that's where we use our CBT techniques to intervene. So a lot is to be learned from the Good Lives model. I just gave you a brief overview here. If you are interested, they have lots of workshops. There are manuals that you can read. You have an article to read for class, and I'm happy to provide you with additional resources. It's somewhat complex, and they've kind of, I don't want to say dumbed it down, but they've used different language that they now use with offenders in the workbook so that it makes it a little bit easier to understand. But I think what I love about the Good Lives model is it's really a positive approach, because there's so much about the criminal justice system that is negative, and you did this, and you're bad, and you're this. And I know as a psychologist that, people thrive when they get positive reinforcement, when they do good and they achieve things. And that's what this model helps. And it also helps us as mental health providers to see our clients in a positive light. So more looking at them as human beings rather than somebody who is an other or who broke the law. So in terms of treatment, we use motivational enhancement techniques. So getting people motivated for change. We teach skills through cognitive behavioral therapy. We alter problematic patterns of mood, thinking, and behavior. We develop pro-social attitudes and beliefs, again, through cognitive behavioral therapy. The Good Lives model is structured, but it's individualized. So each person is going to have a different life plan, and it's going to vary very significantly from one person to another, because not everybody is going to value the same things in their lives. For some people, creativity is going to be super important. They're going to want to, do art and things like that. Other people will not have many interests in that. Maybe spirituality or work or family will be much more important for them. And ultimately, the goal is to develop this Good Lives plan and to live by that plan. The final model we're going to talk about today is the restorative justice model. And I really love this model because I think this benefits not only the offender, but more so the victim and the community that are harmed by the crimes that are committed. Like, you'll often see people who have been victimized who go through life with a lot of anger and resentment, and they're not able to move on because of what has been done to them. And I understand that completely. But sometimes you have to learn to let go and to forgive. And that's what's kind of, in order for you yourself to move on. And it's a very hard thing to do, and not everybody can do it. And sometimes very heinous things have been done to you and your loved ones. But people who have better outcomes in terms of once they've been victimized, either individuals or communities, are the ones that can forgive and who can move on. It's kind of a healing process. So restorative justice is an approach to dealing with conflict that's not punitive, but emphasizes accountability and reconciliation of what the offender did with the larger community. So it's really the offender taking responsibility for what they did and making it right with the victim and the community. I mean, obviously, if you've taken a life, if you've done significant harm, you can never completely make it right. But by you taking accountability and responsibility for your own behavior and apologizing for that, that goes a long way towards healing, both for you, the victim, and the community. So there are three main questions of restorative justice. So restorative justice is what we're going to be talking about. Retributive justice is punishment. So restorative justice is, what was the harm done? How can that harm be repaired? And who is responsible for that repair? So you're seeing how the individual is being held accountable here for what they've done. Retributive justice, which is punishment, is what was the rule or law that was broken? Who broke the law, and how should they be punished? So these are subtle differences, but they make a big difference in terms of the approach that we take. So some of the critical assumptions of restorative justice is that bad behavior is designed best as a violation of people, not rule or law. Because when we commit crimes, we're committing crimes against people, communities, businesses, not just against the law for the most part. And offenders should then be accountable to the people that they have harmed. So, when you rob a store, there is a victim, there is the store owner, there is the business, there are the people that now have to pay additional costs because people have robbed the store multiple times, so now they've had to raise their costs. So now everybody becomes a victim. Or if you've been sexually assaulted, or you had a family member who's been harmed, you have very personal traumas because of what has happened to you. And so victims and communities are given a direct role in seeking justice. Now, that's not to say that everybody wants this direct role. A lot of people want nothing to do with the people who have wronged them, but this gives the people who want that the opportunity to be involved in kind of seeking justice. And you've probably seen times where people, the parents of victims or things like that, have asked for leniency because they're trying to forgive in order so that they can move on. And so justice really needs to balance the needs of the victim, the offender, the community, and our authorities. So there are three main models of restorative justice: victim-offender mediation, or VOM, where you have mediators that are mediating between the victims of the offense and the offenders. There's the community group conferencing. So for more serious offenses, you can have a conference between victims, offenders, and other affected individuals, like law enforcement. And there's a circle process, which is an open discussion generally with the community about how the community would like to handle the situation. So victim-offender mediation is an opportunity for victims to tell the perpetrator how the incident affected them, to directly and constructively express their feelings. And that's really important because, to yell at somebody is not constructive. You need to be at a place in your healing where you can kind of constructively express what has happened to you, that you can ask and receive answers that only the offender can provide you. Like, why did you choose me? Why did you do this to me? What made you want to do this? What did you realize what was going to happen to me? And experience of having a direct voice and participation in the justice process, which can be very powerful because often people who've been victimized report that they're very dissatisfied because they're often left out and they don't know what's going on. They don't hear what's happened. And it's only, after the process has been completed, they find out what that was. And it really helps, and we have research to support that, with emotional healing and restoration for everybody involved. In terms of the offender, it's the opportunity to fully understand the impact with what they did. Because oftentimes you see your victim as somebody who is nameless and like an other, because you don't really understand what you've done to that person. You can explain why you did it, because many times there will be reasons that you engaged in it that the victim may have not considered or understood. But it's also your chance here to take accountability, which I think is super important, and part of the rehabilitation process is people need to take accountability and not minimize what they did, even if it was an accident. There are probably bad decisions that were made along the way to put them in that position, and so this is where you can kind of express your responsibility and regret. And it helps emotional healing and move forward with your life for the offender, but also for the victim. And it gives you an opportunity to participate as the offender in the criminal justice processing. So conferencing is in addition to the victim offender mediation, it also gives the community an opportunity to respond to the needs of the victim. So provide support for the victim who has been harmed, but it also provides support for the offenders while encouraging them to understand and accept their obligations. Gives the part of the community, because a community is harmed when somebody within that community has been violated or wronged, and it provides healing for them. And then it also, gives the community a sense of agency and an ability to recognize and respond as a community to offending behavior and making changes. You'll often see mothering groups. On the streets of Chicago now, we have huge gang violence, and I've seen that there are mothering groups who have gone on the corners and they're trying to prevent this from happening. So people in the community are responding to the behavior. And finally, the last kind of model is the circles model, and it can be used for a variety of different purposes. But it's when the community comes together and really discusses a specific incident or a specific focus. It might not be, there might be an uptake in sexual assaults within your community, and the community comes together and discusses what they can do as a community to prevent this from happening. And it's really kind of a dialogue. So there may not be a specific victim or a specific offender here, but it's really the community coming together. So the restorative justice movement is somewhat, controversial, and it kind of is at odds many times with the Get Tough on Crime. But we were seeing, especially in the Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, an increase in the restorative justice movement. We do see that there are kind of pockets of this in the United States. But I think if we really want to see healing and a true kind of rehabilitative implication of incarceration, we need to incorporate restorative justice for those that are ready and able to in some ways.